Hello, this is Mark Tooley, president of the Institute on Religion and Democracy, and today I am conversing with Owen Strachan, professor of theology at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Kansas City, a prolific author of books and articles, most importantly of which was his recent piece for our Providence magazine on the World War I movie 1917, which has been our most read article of the year 2020 so far. So I'm going to start out by asking Owen about where he found his deep insights about this World War I movie, insights that no one else seems to have developed until he put them to paper. Owen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thanks for having me.
So everyone has loved your review of 1917. Explain your own fascination with that movie.
That's a great question, Mark. I don't know exactly what my interest was sparked by, but basically, I think it was twofold as much as I can remember. I saw the trailers for 1917 like a lot of people did. I'm a war movie junkie. That's not unique, right? And 1917 looked really good. It was made, I could tell, you know, the info said by Sam Mendes. Sam Mendes made a really good film that was kind of, I thought, underplayed in terms of its civilizational significance. So I already had wondered what exactly 1917 was going to say as the film. When I watched it, I started noticing in the film, like a lot of people did, trees. Two things stood out in my first viewing in the theater. And of course, it's all hitting you fast. It's all going by you. But the conversation in the cherry tree glade with all the trees cut down, and spoiler alert for anybody watching this, that caught my attention. It seemed like more was going on there than just trees being cut down and this character Blake telling this other main character Schofield about cherries. Something just sparked. Like, I don't think the director and the screenwriter Christy Cairns-Wilson are just using this to talk about cherries. Maybe they are, but it seems like maybe there's more there. In similar terms to the discussion about tin, metals, soldier medals that had just happened in the film. So then I kept noticing as the film went on, trees being used as road blockages. And then towards the end of the film, Schofield takes refuge in a glade of trees and sits down at the movie's end with his back against a tree. Okay, so that was my initial viewing. I'm not a film critic. No one's paying me to do this. So let that be said. But then I watched the film again when it came out on Amazon. And it seemed like there was even more of that theme. It seemed of trees and rest and that sort of thing. And then the family scene where Schofield happens upon a woman with a baby seemed to be significant. And I can say more about all of this, but point being, Mark, there was a lot more to the film than a ton of critics let on. A ton of critics dismissed it, said it was bad, said it was a trick shot film, said it was just a quest story or a war movie. But in the 34th minute, Schofield says very quickly to Blake, "Keep your eyes on the trees." And I thought, I think that might be the thesis of the film. So I contacted you and kind of out of the sky blue and tried to write an essay about it.
I'm sure you noticed the Twitter account of the two main actors in the film tweeted out your review approvingly. They didn't offer a lot of comments on it, but they liked it.
Yeah, I saw the review for Providence. So appreciate you letting me publish. Frankly, got a lot more play than I thought it would. I mean, it's a review from a non-film critic, a guy who teaches theology in a Baptist school, about a film that came out 4 months ago and was, again, panned. by tons of critics. The audience didn't pan it. Made $368 million on a $100 million budget. So that's not a pan. It was nominated for 11 Academy Awards, 1 for cinematography, Roger Deakins, but still the film was basically dismissed, Mark, by the critics. And I reread a bunch of those reviews just recently in publishing the review and trying to check, am I crazy? Why are other people not talking about this? And again, they savaged this film. And I think they missed a very profound philosophical film that, yes, it does deceive you. It's kind of like Hitchcock. It's kind of like lots of great directors. There's an unfolding of events that is straightforward, but there's more going on, beneath the surface, in my view.
And the only overt spiritual reference is the haunting, wonderful hymn, Just a Poor Wayfaring Stranger, which happens very quickly, but it really sticks to your mind after you hear it. Well, Owen, you subsequently have written an article for us about the 80th anniversary of Winston Churchill's accession to power, and previously wrote for us about Charles de Gaulle. De Gaulle, of course, was a practicing Catholic. Churchill was more ambiguous on religion, but as a Christian theologian, you seem to admire both. So explain that to us if you could.
I don't know exactly what accounts, Mark, for my interest in these figures precisely, because again, I don't teach political philosophy, or I'm not a professor at Hillsdale on statesmanship or something. But I suppose it's a few things. It's basically Western civilization being downgraded and written off in many circles today at the elite level, but I myself finding Western civilization far from perfect, and yet full of beauty, truth, and goodness in many ways. Andrew Roberts, as you will of course know, just published a great feature story for National Review on Western civilization. And
he's
then
the
also,
biographer of Winston Churchill, his latest biography. Yeah.
Exactly, a magisterial biography. And then manhood is another part, I think, that draws me to Churchill, de Gaulle, in this era. Both men were fearless in the face of spectacular odds and defied evil in major form. In common grace terms, I think someone like me would say, from my evangelical background. And yet, there's things we can really learn from common grace, from those who may not be born-again believers necessarily. I don't know the hearts of either of these men, of course, but we can still learn truths. And so writing on Churchill and previously writing about de Gaulle, who I had engaged you about, knowing that you're an expert on foreign policy and these sorts of things, was an opportunity for me to think through Western civilization and its import, something we take hugely for granted today, and then the role of principled manhood in the public square, and just how badly we needed it then and need it today.
And you were also director of the Center for Public Theology at your seminary, is that correct? So there's a more direct connection to these personalities and the political roles they played.
Yes, that's right. I love public theology. I teach systematic theology primarily here at Midwestern Seminary in Kansas City, but I also teach on theology and culture. It's called Christ and Culture in different spheres. It's also called public theology. So I have kind of broad-ranging interests. Theology is not a tame discipline. Of course, the truth that is in Jesus Christ claims all of life. And so anywhere we're investigating truth, anywhere we're seeing more broadly beauty, truth, and goodness, that philosophical trio, we're seeing a reflection in some form of divine truth, God himself, and so and his goodness. And so so those are some of the interests that motivate me in these subjects, yes. So
you're teaching at one of the largest, not just evangelical, but one of the largest seminaries in America, and you're a member of the largest Protestant denomination in America, and itself the largest organized evangelical force in America. If you could give us a sweeping overview of how you assess the state of evangelicalism in America today, in terms of its political and social witness, and where it is spiritually. What are its strengths today, and what are its greatest weaknesses at large, but also within academia?
Oh, wow, what a fun question. I think I would say that we seem to go through cycles throughout history where there's a big fight for the gospel and for the health of the church, a fight often grounded in doctrine. And then in God's kindness, there's victory. There's also significant defeats. So I studied New Evangelicalism in my PhD program at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. And so I studied simultaneously the defeat after defeat after defeat of the fundamentalists and conservatives, though they're often called fighting fundamentalists. They lost and lost and lost and lost, which perhaps tells us something actually about the liberals. Maybe they were truly the ones who were fighting and who won. And yet, nonetheless, though the fundamentalists and especially the conservatives, that's who I was mostly writing about, not the fundamentalist movement itself, but though they lost, they also had tremendous energy and so founded new institutions. So that's a theme that recurs in history, in church history. What has happened, I think, in the last 20 or 30 years is that there were a number of battles that occurred in Baptist circles and others, and there were major victories won. The conservative resurgence in my denomination, the Southern Baptist Convention. And what I think happens after victories are won, in a spiritually healthy way, I mean, is there can be a time when everybody assumes all's well. But I think what we're seeing with the rise of critical race theory and some distortions of the gospel and the ongoing specter of the prosperity gospel and the rise of the new sexual orthodoxy, which puts Christian sexual orthodoxy in the cultural penalty box, is that actually we're not in a high time when we can rest and sit back as Christians. Actually, there are new threats on the horizon, just as they always come back, and they're back. And some of those threats, and again, this isn't new either, are in the camp. And so there's a real need right now for every God-loving evangelical to take up arms, not against flesh and blood, and not in a red-faced shouting way, but against Satan and his anti-kingdom of darkness, and say, we've got to keep loving the truth and keep promoting the truth and keep defending the truth, even as I know you and your peers do at the IRD and in some of the mainline works. That has to happen across the board, I think, today.
Now, among Southern Baptists, there really is no open debate on the sexuality issues. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there is, as you reference, a debate over critical race theory and over social justice issues. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, there is a debate with sexuality, not so much in terms of gender dysphoria per se, although there are some matters there to sort out. But there are a couple issues that are front burner issues. There's women being the preacher and teacher of the local church, and Southern Baptists are back to debating that. And that's a significant thing. Complementarity has to be reclaimed in every generation. In addition, there's the idea that one can be a gay Christian. That, in my view, violates 1 Corinthians 6 in terms of not only behavior, but identity. But then, yes, critical race theory is a major challenge. It's the idea, it's many things, really, but one of the most significant principles embedded in critical race theory is that reason itself is effectively a tool of racist oppression. And so critical race theory basically says that race is an invention in the 19th century or 18th, 19th century in the West, and it is used to create the idea that some are equal and some are unequal. We know that racism was effectual in a terrible way in the period of slavery and Jim Crow and Reconstruction following that, but it's also excuse me, slavery, Reconstruction, Jim Crow. But we also need to recognize critical race theorists argue that we're in just as wicked a racist era as that today. And the very structures of society themselves, critical race theorists argue, including reason, are tools of oppression. Now, Mark, very quickly, this is a massive issue deserving much broader comment, but racism is a real problem. Racism has to always be fought at every level. We desperately need the rule of law to adjudicate real crimes. We need the church to be a voice for truth and justice and these sorts of things. And yet we also need to make clear that critical race theory is actually not Christian. It's an anti-Christian system of thought itself. While we are always anti-racist, understood in the right way, we actually have a stronger justice program than critical race theory does. Critical race theory itself will tear down society, morality, and reason. And that's just not a solution we can adopt.
No, I should mention that you're the former president of the Council on Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. So if you could briefly tell us what exactly complementarianism is for those who aren't very familiar with it. And then also you mentioned the term gay Christian. What does that mean, and what is that debate all about?
Complementarity is the view that God has made the sexes equal for his glory, equal in dignity and worth, and yet has called men and women to different roles in the home, the church, and to society in some degree. And so complementarians believe that men are called to be the head of their wife and of their household beyond, in fulfillment of Ephesians 5, 22 to 33 and other texts, and that men are called to be the elders of the local church, and the preachers and teachers and shepherds of the local church in fulfillment of Titus 1 and 1 Timothy 3. And so complementarians defend these truths, and the outworking of biblical sexuality is that there is only one God-glorifying expression of human sexuality, and that is lifelong covenantal marriage between one man and one woman. Sex is created for marriage and is only rightly ordered when it is expressed in the covenant of marriage. So every other form of sexual expression, whether it's activity or identity or thought or desire, is ungodly and deserving of repentance. So I just wrote a trilogy that's just over here, just over my shoulder, of 3 little books aimed at helping not scholars, but normal Christians like myself think through these things. The 3 books, very short, very readable, are called What Does the Bible Teach About Lust? What does the Bible teach about homosexuality? And what does the Bible teach about transgenderism? And then I also wrote this other book, this blue one, called Re-Enchanting Humanity. That came out last fall. And that's kind of the fuller, more scholarly take on not only sexuality, but the whole doctrine of humanity, which I argue, drafting off of Charles Taylor, Canadian philosopher, we need to re-enchant.
Now, the term gay Christian that you use refers to, I guess it's a growing movement of Christians who believe in the church's teachings, and they have homosexual desires, but they're celibate, but they celebrate being gay. Explain to us what that's all about.
Yeah, there's really 2 iterations of gay Christianity. There's probably more splicing you can do, but there's side A and side B of gay Christianity, so-called. Side A, I believe I had this right, says you can have a gay identity and gay activity and still be a Christian. Side B says you cannot act out your homosexual instincts and be a faithful Christian, but you can have a gay identity. So Wesley Hill and others have argued for, in their view, a faithfully Christian gay Christianity. While I respect various figures in that movement on the side B dimension, I do not think that's a sound move myself. I do recognize that, of course, who we are is an interesting mix, to be sure, in terms of Christian hamartiology, a doctrine of sin. And yet, as I referenced a minute ago, 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 11 is a passage where Paul is writing to the Corinthian church. The Corinthian church is effectually, for our modern purposes, transposed in San Francisco, if you will. In other words, it's in a very pagan place. It's in a place where there's all sorts of sexual depravity, bestiality, homosexuality, temple prostitution, and so on and so forth. And it's to those people that Paul says, such were some of you, in referencing both the active and the passive partner in a homosexual encounter, an active homosexual man and an effeminate man. And Paul says, such were some of you. So he doesn't say, in other words, Mark, this is what you used to do. He says in 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 11, this is what you used to be. But you were washed, sanctified, justified. So that's what we were. And that would mean for our purposes today, as I read it, speaking with respect for others who disagree with me, that we cannot claim a gay Christian identity.
Now, you have, of course, generated your share of controversies over the years, online and otherwise. How do you deal in this situation as a sometimes controversial and polarizing figure? Has that strengthened you in your convictions and in your faith, or is it more of a challenge for you?
I think the biggest controversy I've gotten into was critiquing football as perhaps ultra-violent some years ago. So that was an interesting thing for me as one who, has occasionally found myself in something theological, but here I was debating whether football was too violent, and I got a taste of my own side's pushback, and helped me think some things through along those lines. But I was trained under Al Mohler, the Southern Seminary president and theologian, and he himself was trained by Carl F.H. Henry, the great Evangelical and Baptist theologian. And neither of those men were scared of a fight, but not any fight, as I read them. No man is perfect, no person is perfect, but they were not scared of the right fight. In other words, we were talking about Churchill earlier. We were talking about soldiers earlier as well. There are some fights you have to have. There are some fights that come to you. And there are some fights that you must enter into if you are going to be one who stands behind the holy, inspired, inerrant, authoritative, and sufficient Word of God. So I'm a work in progress, Mark. God is sanctifying me and killing sin in me as He needs to do through the Holy Spirit, and growing me in different ways, and has been, over the years. And I want that work to continue. I pray the Spirit's work continues in me. And yet, I also want to show up for the right fights. I don't want to seek them out. I don't want fights for their own sake. I have 3 little kids and a wife to love and lead at home. So I have plenty on my plate. But I also want to, when needed, run with the lions and ride to the sound of the guns.
Well, you probably don't want to predict what your next fight is going to be. So as we move towards conclusion, let me ask you instead, the Southern Baptist Convention, of course, enjoyed great growth for many decades and has suffered decline for the last 15 years. Do you foresee the convention reversing that decline? If so, how will it do it? And what do Southern Baptists have to say that's unique to American Christianity today, as the church increasingly becomes non-denominational or post-denominational in American Christianity?
Those are fascinating questions. I think what I see is a real hunger. I teach at a seminary that also has a college, and both of these have grown greatly in the last 5 or 6 years under the leadership of Jason Allen, all in God's kindness. And what I see is that young people are tenaciously hungry for the truth. Many young people, young men in particular, don't have guidance. Young men who show up on a campus like this, a lot of them are from broken homes. They haven't had a great relationship with their dad. They haven't been discipled in their Christian home, a number of them. They are hungry, again, they're hungry for the truth. They want a big gospel. They don't want a little bitty Jesus, and they don't want entertainment, at church and these sorts of things. They want the thick stuff. They want the deep things of God. And so that gives me great confidence and hope in God. Not that our numbers are going to always continue, not that annual FTE at a seminary at the institutional level is always going to be this or that or the other thing, but I just continue to see that the rising generation, they're not perfect by any stretch, but for as many shots as millennials take and Generation Z takes, I guess now, they seem to me to be hungry for truth. What that means in light of your questions about the future is that I don't know what the numbers precisely are going to be in the SBC or evangelicalism more broadly. But I'm bullish about the truth, and I'm making a very big bet, betting my very life itself on the defense and promotion of sound doctrine. And so it's my hope that as in our different denominations, in our different networks, even in our parachurch institutions that you and I are both in different forms, clasping arms, across those networks and denominations. It's my hope that those who love truth will continue speaking the truth in love, Ephesians 4:15. And we may see, honestly, Mark, our movements contract some bit. That may happen. That may not be defeat, though. It could feel like defeat to us. It could feel like defeat, perhaps, to the older generation who knew the heyday. But I don't think it necessarily is defeat. It may mean some level of contraction, but we're going to fight on regardless, and we're going to keep preaching Jesus. And I believe that God is going to continue advancing His kingdom and growing His church, and we have the sure and certain promise that the gates of hell are never going to prevail against the kingdom. So I'm going to just continue, in a Pascalian sense, if you will, betting on that, because it's underwritten by the blood of Christ.
Owen Strachan, Professor of Theology at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, thank you for a very insightful and enjoyable conversation, and I'm looking forward to your next article for Providence.
I'm looking forward to writing it. I really appreciate you and this opportunity, and I hope this means fruitful partnership in days ahead, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Owen.